Hey guys, I'm Urizi. This story is all about what if Naruto was the owner of a cafe diner. Even the gods and goddesses of Olympus needed a day off. Sometimes they needed time away from the constant bickering and never-ending controversies of their family. On one such day, Wisdom and Moon found themselves discovering a hidden gem within the city that never sleeps, and meeting a familiar blonde knucklehead with a penchant for the color orange. Before we proceed with the story, please like and subscribe to this channel if you liked the video, and don't forget to check the description for the other works of the author if you liked the story. Let's start. Chapter 15, Part 15. Olympus. Goodness, it's the same every year, Hestia muttered, weaving her way through the line of gods and goddesses that lined the streets of Olympus, queuing outside the Temple of Zeus like they did the same time every year. Immortals major and minor, and even some of the nymphs and satyr that looked after Olympus were in attendance. Each was looking for a minute with the king while he was in a good mood. She spotted Artemis and Athena near the front, while near the back was Apollo and Ares, the pair likely having arrived late and didn't appear happy by it if their grumbling was any indication. She wasn't sure why the daughters of Zeus were queuing up when her brother tended to give them everything they needed and wanted regardless. Excuse me. Coming through. Lady Hestia. No cutting in line. Miss Hestia, there's a line. Can she do that? Beats me. She gave everyone her signature warm smile. I'm sorry everyone, but I need to speak with my brother. It won't take long. Some of the other gods appeared pouty, causing her to shake her head. For deities that could live forever, they were sure impatient. And Hestia? I think this is the first time I've ever seen you take advantage of father after his night with Hera. The voice came from Athena, as Hestia came to a stop at the doors of her brother's temple, sparing a glance as Athena tilted her head in her direction, gazing at her with those stern grey eyes of hers. Do you have something you wish for from father? The goddess of wisdom looked perplexed. She'd never known her aunt to ask for anything. Unlike the rest of their family, Hestia enjoyed the simple things and wasn't one for extravagance. She didn't need the fine jewelry, or a giant temple. She too comforts and warmth over grandeur. It simply wasn't in her nature. The goddess of the hearth shook her head, and a small smile appeared on her face as she gently pulled the doors open. No, nothing for me. I've just come to visit my little brother, that's all. Don't worry. I won't keep him too long. She meant to go inside, but stopped and turned back towards her niece. What are you asking for this year, Athena? Athena straightened her back. Many of the world museums are in desperate need of refurbishment. Some go as far as needing renovations, but the mortals in charge are being difficult. I'm merely going to check with father to see if I can go down and hurry things along. Athena crossed her arms. Maybe ask for an additional museum, or maybe a library to be built in a location of my choosing later on. I'm sure you have a list made up for possible locations. Of course. Without lists, nothing would get done. Something's never changed, Hestia thought, before wishing her niece good luck. I hope you get what you're after. Behind Athena, Hestia offered Artemis a wave. The goddess of the moon offered one in return before she disappeared through the doors. She heard some groans as she entered, but could only laugh as the doors closed behind her. Trekking inside, she unsurprisingly found her brother situating himself on his veranda that looked out across Olympus, and down on the mortals' world. The Temple of Zeus was one of the two structures built on the highest point of the fabled mountain, the other being the throne room which took up the left-hand side. The king of the gods was still dressed in his sleepwear, a dark blue robe covering his body, while a mug of coffee sat in his right hand. A range of breakfast food spread across the table, with a copy of the New York Times newspaper off to the side. To her surprise, he wasn't alone, and sat in front of him was the queen herself. Bathed in the light of the morning, it was no wonder why Hera was recognized as the most beautiful goddess on Olympus before Aphrodite arrived on the scene. She appeared to favor her original form with her long black licorice-like hair swaying down freely down her back, untied from any braid she often styled it in. A smile was on her face that matched her husband, with small crumbs dotted across the top of her mouth with a half-eaten pastry in hand. Her dark brown eyes shimmed with happiness and amusement. She and youngest daughter were near copies of each other, but there was a regality in Hera's form that Hebe couldn't mimic. Beneath the table, her feet were bare with a golden ankle wrapped around her ankle. She couldn't help notice her foot brushing against her husband's leg. I didn't think Hera would be here. Normally, she retires to her temple after her night with Zeus. Though it appeared that didn't seem to be the case, it didn't hinder her plans. She and Naruto had been planning today for a time and needed to see it through. Hera's presence wasn't going to stop her. Stepping onto the veranda and approaching the table where the happy couple sat, it took but a moment before both sensed her presence and turned their heads in her direction. "Sister." Zeus's voice reached her first. The large god pushed himself out of the chair, a beaming smile on his face as he quickly crossed the veranda and scooped her up in a hug. His beard tickled the top of her head, and she found herself kept there for a few moments before finally getting settled back on her feet. "This is a nice surprise. Come. Come. Join us for a late breakfast." "Zeus is right, this is a nice surprise and a welcome one at that," Hera replied, putting her pastry to the side and dusting off her hands. "To what do we owe the pleasure on this fine morning?" Hestia settled on the chair between them. It seemed Zeus wasn't the only one in a good mood. Her sister looked happier than she'd been in months. Perhaps their yearly ritual of Zeus taking her virginity was the final action needed to repair their marriage, however temporary it may be until something else came along to infuriate the pair. Hopefully, today's meeting wouldn't be that event. "Oh, nothing. I wanted to see if Zeus was free today and if he had time to come into the city with me. Maybe get a spot of lunch." By the look on the god of the sky's face, that appeared to be something he wanted to hear. His broad smile got broader, and his electric blue eyes, the ones Thalia's inherited, glowed brighter in delight. "That sounds like a terrific idea. I can't remember the last time we went into the city for a meal. Certainly not this decade." He looked across the table and back to his wife. "Would you like to join us, my love?" For a brief moment, worry filled Hestia's heart. She hadn't counted on Hera attending the meeting with her, and if she did, then it would likely spell disaster. Thalia would be there, and since she had been at the center of her sister's ire over the past couple of months, she didn't think Hera would be able to keep herself in check. If she lashed out, not only would Zeus's anger also begin to burn, but Naruto would step in as well. It would be a mess and not one that could clean up with a simple motion of someone's hand. Luckily for her, that worry was not, as Hera shook her head. "I'm afraid I already have pre-existing plans with Hebe and Immortality, though maybe some other time. There's this little place in the city that's been all the rage amongst the gods of late. Maybe we could try it sometime soon." Strangely enough, that's where I was hoping to take Zeus today. Her sister visibly deflated, sticking her perfect lips out in a pout. "How unfortunate," Hera muttered, now looking genuinely disappointed. "Well, never mind. You'll have to tell me what it's like when you return, my love, and we can plan a trip ourselves." "Of course. I would love nothing more, my queen." Standing up from her chair, she walked to the other side of the table, and planted a soft kiss on her husband's lips, a hand gently brushing against his cheek. "Last night was... I know. We haven't had an evening like that in some years. Let's hope we have many more nights like that in the future," she whispered back. The two were acting so lovey-dovey that Hestia started to feel out of place, and tried to look anywhere but the happy couple. She didn't need to hear any details on their night together and gently hummed to herself as she waited for them to finish. Eventually, Hera parted from her husband. "I need to go and get ready. I meet with the girls in an hour. Enjoy your day together. Perhaps try and bring me back something sweet for dinner tonight." "Am I not sweet enough for you, my beautiful wife?" Zeus replied, a look in his eye that Hestia didn't like. If she hadn't arrived when she did, the pair would have likely started using the table for something else. "We'd be happy to, sister." With that, the goddess of marriage disappeared in a golden shimmer, leaving the king and his elder sister alone together. Io won't be joining them. The twin of Ares hadn't visited Olympus in a long time. Many of their family hadn't seen Io in decades, maybe even centuries. The only person who had any contact with the goddess of war was Hebe. Hera had tried on different occasions to coax it out from her daughter, but with no success. No doubt she would likely try again today. The relationship between Io and her parents was tender at best. Still no luck on that front. Zeus sighed, and crossed his arms. That girl. She was never an easy one. She was never really the same after being denied a position on the Olympian Council. She remembered that day. Zeus chose Athena over Io and gave her the seat instead of Io, a seat which he had promised to Io for a long time. She could still remember the hurt expression on her niece's face, worsening when Hera, who initially supported Io, sided with Zeus on the decision. Athena was the better fit for the position. There was no denying that. As the goddess who resided over wisdom, strategy, and warfare, the Olympian Council was the best fit for her. Afterwards, they all agreed they didn't need another deity of war, and Io grew bitter and angry as a result. The little girl that would fawn for attention from her mother and father was arguably one of the most bloodthirsty deities on Olympus. Perhaps even more so than Ares, and that was a frightening thought. Zeus didn't say anything. He merely turned his head and looked out across the world that was open to him. He didn't say it aloud, but he missed his daughter. Don't forget you have a long queue of people outside your temple waiting to ask you for things. All the god of the sky did was grumble beneath his breath. He was well aware of the other immortals of his pantheon, as well as the nymphs and dryads used the morning after his night with Hera to take advantage of his good mood. Whether they knew it or not, he caught on to their shenanigans centuries ago, but being the benevolent deity he knew himself to be, he went with it and acted in a manner that wouldn't give himself away. Oh, joy! Who's first? She gave him a look. Who do you think? He sighed. Which one is it this time? A museum? Or a library? Hestia laughed. I think she might be aiming for both, along with some renovations. Maybe I should have given her divinity over greed too, and gluttony to Artemis. I imagine she's out there too. She's second in line. Of course, she is. Letting out a small huff, Zeus quickly drank the rest of his coffee and stood up from his seat. With a click of his fingers, his robe transformed and was soon standing in his usual blue pinstriped suit with thunder dancing across the fabric. All right, let's get this over with, and then we'll head down to the mortal world. He visibly deflated a little, and walked a little slower back inside his temple, trying to look upbeat and happy. Wish me luck. Good luck, Zeus. Underworld. Why are you telling me weeks later? The low and baritone voice of the ruler of the dead asked, his dark and obsidian-like eyes glancing down at his daughter from his throne. Did you not think this was information you should have shared then, instead of now? Suddenly finding the marble tiles of her father's temple more desirable than ever before, the goddess of ghosts avoided eye contact, not wishing to see the coldness that was radiating from them. Why did she have to be so indecisive? She sat on the information about Naruto Uzumaki for well over a month, going back and forth whether to inform the ruler of the dead or not, before finally making her mind up earlier that morning. It wasn't something I thought I would ever discover. I wasn't sure how to approach the subject. It's not every day one comes across a man from the golden age that's found a way to defy time. She reasoned, though, by the look on her father's face, an expression of sheer neutrality. He wasn't buying it. The very fact that you came across such a person should have sent warning bells off in that head of yours. Were you planning on hiding this from me? No. Melino replied, stomping one foot on the marble. As I said, I didn't know how to bring this to you. I didn't know how you'd react. A clap ran through the room, the sound coming from the Hades' two hands. Well, now you know. He glared down at her. If you had told me right off the bat when we first visited his place of work together, then perhaps my reaction would have been different. Hades wasn't sure how he would have reacted if Melino had brought this information to him weeks ago, but at least he wouldn't have been feeling angry at his daughter for keeping such information to herself for over a month. You've told me everything you know? You haven't left out any details. That's everything I found out, Melino confirmed, finally raising her face and looking him square in the eye. His relatives live in the oldest part of Elysium, as I said. She started, though thumb bled over her wording as she tried to find the right words. The way they describe him. What about it? Well, he doesn't come across as a bad person. They had nothing but good things to say about him. Her hands twiddled together in front of her. He's very loved. I can't deny it wasn't sweet to see and hear. Hades leaned back in his throne, letting out a small scoff before rubbing his head forward with his pale hand. A man of the golden age living beneath our very noses for centuries. No, millennia. One wouldn't think it was possible. Despite his birth coinciding with the final decades of that age, Hades never met anyone alive from that generation. He was too busy residing in the stomach of his father and waging war with him. There had been talk amongst his siblings to try and go down to the mortal world and observe them. The mortals of the old age had abilities and gifts those of today could only dream of possessing. Everything they learned and knew about them came from their mother, the Titaness, Rhea. Unlike the other titans, she had watched them in idle curiosity and fascination from above. How is he still alive after all this time? I don't know, nor do his loved ones in Elysium. They are as confused as us how he still lives. He should have died in the Great Shift. No one from the Golden Generation could have survived the destruction that the Earth Mother wrought upon the world. All he and his siblings could do was watch from atop Olympus as the world beneath them churned and twisted the world into something new. Landscapes changed, and oceans took new shapes around them. The once mighty supercontinent broke into the ones they knew today. The very thought of a single person surviving such an upheaval of the planet was ludicrous to acknowledge. And yet one did. He served his family hot drinks, and delicious delicacies, while making idle chit-chat with them, never revealing what he was. He wasn't sure how to feel with this revelation. The man seemed nice enough, and his wife hadn't caught on to anything negative about the man. Persephone was a good judge of character, much like his elder sister in that regard. However, the fact he and Persephone hadn't caught on to the man's emotional ties to those in the underworld, and Melino had, showed him how complacent he'd become. That piece of knowledge didn't sit right with him. Clicking his tongue, Hades stood from his throne and descended the steps. With a flick of his wrist, his attire changed. Gone was his dark robes, replaced with the usual outfit he wore when visiting the mortal world. He needed answers, and he wasn't going to sit around and wait for someone to bring them to him. Sometimes, the only thing to do was to go and get them yourself. Hopefully, none of his family on Olympus would be visiting the Fox's Den today, though he planned on shrouding his divine signature, so no one stopped by for a visit at the same time. Change your attire, and follow me. Father. Melino replied, watching as Hades moved past her and falling in line a few steps behind him. Where are you going? I mean, where are we going? We're going to the human world, and we're going to pay the Fox's Den a visit. Melino said nothing but did release a small gulp, her eyes remaining on the frosty back of the Lord of the Underworld. West Village. I can't remember the last time I visited West Village. Admittedly, not much has changed, though I do get a sense of nostalgia fall over me. Zeus proclaimed, walking side by side with his elder sister and glancing all around him. I wonder if that Chinese takeout place I used to like is still there? I remember I used to order from there nearly every day. I remember, Hestia replied. They must have looked like quite the sight with Zeus's enormous height and frame and Hestia's petiteness. Hestia barely came up Zeus's chest. I also remember Hera banning you from going there ever again because your temple and your clothes were beginning to smell exactly like the said restaurant. Oh, yeah. Instead of teleporting into the West Village, the pair had settled for traveling the old Phocian way, jing down the lift of the Empire State Building, and walking through the streets like a pair of regular mortals. The guard stationed at the elevator that stopped anyone using the Olympian transportation system to Olympus looked ready to have a heart attack at the sight of the king. Clearly, Zeus didn't use this passage very often, though Hestia was a regular during her walks around the city. They walked for a good 40 minutes, taking the long route purposefully to chat as brother and sister. Zeus, being who he was, didn't get as much free time as one would think, while Hestia had been notably absent due to her new commitments. Hestia, being who she was one of the few gods Zeus could drop all walls with and speak honestly and truthfully and would confide about his problems for hours. She was his shrink in a funny way, and a shoulder to lean on when the stresses of being king became too much. Their love, unlike that he had for Hera, and once upon a time, Demeter, was strictly that of siblings. Nothing more and nothing less. She believed her brother needed that female presence in his life. More so than her other brothers. So, I know what Athena asked for this year, but what about Artemis? A soft grunt came from Zeus. She wants an upgrade on her chariot, but Hephaestus is, in her words, being a stupid head and telling her no. So she wants you to convince him to do it for her. More like ordering him to do it for her. Hestia let out a soft laugh. you give in too easily to those girls. Have you ever said no to them? Zeus went to speak, but despite his mouth being open, no words came out. I thought not. I think you need to be a little tougher with them if you want my opinion. You're certainly tougher on the boys. The god of the sky gave his sister a dry look. His sons were, for the lack of a better term, idiots. Where they got it from he had no idea. It certainly wasn't from him. It must have been from their mothers. His daughter didn't give him a tenth of the problems his sons would find themselves in. Stop staring at the beautiful mortal, Zeus, Hestia told him, annoyance laced in her voice. Across the street, a tall and attractive blonde woman proudly displaying her rather sizable assets in a low-cut top had caught her brother's full attention. What made it worse was the pair appeared to be silently communicating to each other with a series of winks and smiles. She could see the woman giggle into her hand, and a grin wove its way onto Zeus's face before a quick clap on the back of the head brought him out of it. Hestia gave him a look, and the king had the good decency of gulping at the ire in her eyes, and you wonder why Hera has to keep such a close eye on you. But she started it. He motioned over to the woman across the street, who appeared to be losing interest quickly now that Zeus's attention was no longer on her. I was just. Oh, I know what you were just. Hestia replied, grabbing his sleeve and tugging him away and towards their destination at a quicker rate. I'm not being blamed for you forgetting your vows again because I didn't keep a closer eye on you. Hera's rage had already encompassed Olympus once this year, and that's already one too many. Do you really want to poke that bear again? No. Zeus shook his head, took one last look at the blonde woman before ignoring her existence and continuing forward. How much longer until we get there? Not long. It's just up this way. I hope this place is as good as everyone's been making it out to be. Athena and Artemis, in particular, have really been hamming this place up. It's not that far. A couple of minutes, and we'll be there. When a couple of minutes passed, Zeus couldn't help but stare at the brightly colored outside of the fox's den, and couldn't help compare it to that golden monstrosity Apollo called a temple. Orange was a bold choice, especially considering it was the brightest shade of anything for blocks. Hera would have a heart attack the moment her eyes rested on this place. This is the place Athena and Artemis have been talking non-stop over. Zeus asked, pointing up at the building with an incredulous look. It's like a giant Satsuma. Everyone has different tastes, I suppose. Hestia shrugged and reasoned. Truthfully, she thought the outside of the fox's den was a little too bold even for her, but she knew how much her friend loved the color. Shall we go in? Let's. The brother and sister pair closed the gap and were soon just a couple of meters from the front door. Hestia couldn't deny, her heart felt like it was beating like a set of drums against her chest. She and Naruto had been preparing for this moment, but now that it was here, Hestia could only hope Zeus's mind was open to what he was going to learn. It would either end up great or end up very bad. She didn't feel like there was going to be any middle ground today. Just as she was about to reach for the door, Zeus's voice broke the silence, and Hestia couldn't help but note the coldness laced in it. Turning her head, she felt her stomach drop, and her veins feel like ice was injected into them. Of all days, why did he have to appear? Hades. Hestia couldn't stop her voice from sounding like a squeak. The god of the underworld looked across from his sister, a few meters between them with a surprised look on his face. Sister. His voice was as cold and smooth as always. This is a surprise. Yes, it is. I didn't think I'd see you until next winter solstice. Hestia looked behind her brother and noticed the younger goddess standing a couple of feet behind her brother. Melino? Is that you? Her niece/grandniece was a rare visitor on the surface world. She couldn't remember the last time she'd seen the younger immortal, and how rare it was to see her in her normal form, instead of that ghastly ghostly appearance she tended to favor. Good afternoon, Aunt Hestia, Melino replied. Her face was a mask of insecurities. Her dark eyes looked between the three older deities and gulped at how imposing the two sons appeared while squaring off with each other. Times like this, she wished Persephone was here to wrap her arm around her and tell her everything was going to be okay. It was no secret that the eldest and youngest sons of the Titan King did not get on, but if the stormy look on Zeus's face and the look of cold indifference on her father's was any indication, the two were not pleased to see one another. Come here, my dear. Hestia noticed Melino's worry and ushered her over. She put an arm around her shoulders, bringing her closer to keep her calm. It did little to soothe her own. It was times like these she wished Poseidon was here. Though he had a temper like his brothers, the middle son was far more mellow in comparison. He wasn't the type to openly antagonize Zeus and Hades unless provoked first. It took a lot to rile the god of the seas up. "Brother," Hades started, glancing at Zeus like the king of the gods was a bug that needed to be stepped on. Seeing his youngest brother was not on his agenda of things to do. "What are you doing here, Hades?" Zeus's voice felt like booming thunder from far away. "Haven't you got the underworld to keep an eye on, or are you beginning to slacken your duties?" The same feelings were running rampant through Zeus as well, and felt his good mood begin to fade. Seeing his elder brother once a year was already too much. "You'd know all about slacking, wouldn't you?" Hades looked over his brother's shoulder. "What? No, Hera? Did our sister finally let you off the leash again after your most recent affair? I'm surprised she'd let you out of her sight." "Be silent, Hades. Do not speak of things you have no part in. Did I strike a nerve?" Thunder boomed overhead, and very quickly the clear skies began to darken as thunderclouds started forming across the city. If that wasn't enough, the ground beneath them shook with nearby shadows visibly darkening. Finding her courage, Hestia let out a guttural cough, drawing their attention. "Stop it, both of you." She snapped at them. "I know you two don't get along, but there are a time and a place, and this isn't it. Cut it out before you accidentally raise New York to the ground." Jingle. All halted their actions and turned towards the now open door of the fox's den, a bell ringing in their ears. Sticking his head through the door, the blonde head of Naruto Uzumaki looked around at the small group forming in front of his store. His blue eyes widened when he saw Hades, his thoughts running rampant in his head, before releasing a sigh. He looked between the two brothers, then at Melino, and then to Hestia. "I take it things haven't gone to plan." Hestia snorted. It was a sound the two brothers didn't hear from their sister often, that's putting it mildly. He ran a hand through his hair. "Can't do much about it, I guess." He looked back at Hades. "By your expression, I'm guessing this isn't a social visit." "Correct." "By your expression and by the fact you appear to know my sister," Hades glanced at his elder sister, "you know who I am, don't you?" Naruto nodded. "I do. I've known since your first visit with your wife. I didn't feel it was my place to reveal such knowledge." The god of the underworld grunted back and merely stared back at him. Above them, thunder boomed, and all eyes fell on the god of the sky. Zeus had waited patiently, waiting for someone to explain what was going on. However, being out of the loop began to grind on his pride, and glared at Hestia. "What is going on?" he demanded. "Don't glare at her, you idiot." Hades hissed. "She's not at fault here." "No one is at fault here, but I think this conversation might be better had inside. We're drawing some unwanted attention." Naruto reasoned, and pointed out all mortals stood out on the streets looking frightened by the crazy weather, and the minor earthquake ripping through the city. Some were hanging onto street lamps as they tried to keep their balance, while others started taking shelter as lightning cracked across the sky. "Come on, let go inside." He put a hand on Hestia's shoulder. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine. I just didn't expect Hades of all people to appear today." "You and me both," he joked before both disappeared inside, leaving a gawking Zeus and Hades. The reason their expressions looked so bewildered was simple. Neither had ever seen Hestia allow a man who wasn't one of her brothers or her nephews touch her. "Come on. I've got a peppermint tea brewing for you. You're a lifesaver." "I've been known to do that from time to time." "What in the world?" Zeus muttered to himself. Seeing his beloved elder sister acting cozy with a male was irking him something fierce. Beside him, he noticed Hades begin to move, and motioned for Melino to follow. "Hades." The elder son didn't bother looking back at his brother as he opened the door and followed the pair inside. "What? I'm not going to stand out here all day," Hades replied, before disappearing inside. It's nice to see you again, Lord Grandfather." Melino gave a quick bow before hurrying after her father. The god of the sky could do little else but follow after them, rampant with questions filling his head. Hestia clearly knew the blonde man and suspected he must have been the one his daughters spoke so highly of. He looks like a one of Apollo's spawn. He thought to himself, just as many others had done before him. Shaking his head, he let out a loud huff. I should have stayed in bed with Hera. Now there was an idea he could get behind. He didn't get very far inside and almost ran into the back of Hades. Hades. What dash he started to say, but went silent as his eyes trailed to the spot Hades and Mano were staring at. Sitting on a table in the back with coloring books and crayons scattered across the table was none other than his daughter, Thalia. Thalia. He croaked out, surprise lacing his voice. The little girl looked up, hearing someone say her name, and looked over at the group. Before anyone else could say anything, she hopped off her seat and the three gods watched as she ran behind Hestia and clung to her top. The goddess could only let out a low laugh and patted the top of Thalia's dark curls. No need to be shy, sweetie. Her little face peeked out from behind Hestia, and Zeus could feel his daughter's eyes linger on him before hiding away again. Hestia? What is the meaning of this? His daughter wasn't supposed to be here. She was supposed to be in California with her mother. If Hera found out she'd been brought to New York again, he was worried his dear wife would do something rash and unforgivable. Not to mention, the gods were not to have any contact with their demigods. The rule was in place for a reason. Granted, Artemis had a past due to the nature of her duties, as did Dionysus, who was currently helping Chiron in looking after the camp. But no one else should have been. In a lower voice, he asked, "Why is she here?" Instead of answering him right away, Hestia took a seat and gently cupped Thalia's face. "Why don't you head on to the back with Mr. Naruto, and have a little nap? I can tell you're getting tired, young lady." A pout grew on Thalia's face, but couldn't stop the yawn from breaking out. "But I'm not tired." "Of course, you're not," she smiled. "That's what happens when you stay up too late with Mr. Naruto to watch a movie past your bedtime. Go on now. Mr. Naruto has a blanket and pillow for you in his office." "Okay," was all Thalia said before giving the new people in the den one last glance. Like before, her gaze lingered on Zeus for a moment, before quickly disappearing through the door that led to the kitchen and Naruto's office. Hestia's smile widened as her niece disappeared, and turned back to look at her family. "I think she knows there's something about you that's familiar. They do say children can get a sense of when a parent or someone with a strong connection to them is near." "What is she doing here?" Zeus asked again. Outside, lightning cracked across the sky. He wanted answers. What kind of game was Hestia trying to play? The goddess held a hand up. "I know you're angry and confused, but all will be explained shortly." Hestia replied, and motioned for everyone to take a seat. "Naruto will be out shortly with food and drinks for us." She looked at Hades and Melano. "He'll whip something up for the two of you as well." Hades grunted, and Melano nodded. "I'm still confused to why you're both here, but regardless, it is nice to see you both. I didn't anticipate the two of you being here, but you're here now." Everyone in the room took a seat around the table. The brothers each took a seat on Hestia's side, though opposite one another. Uneasily, Melano took the chair on the other side, stuck between the glaring brothers. "This is highly uncomfortable," she thought. She could practically feel the animosity between the pair. "Please, stop glaring at each other and calm down. I know this isn't what anyone expected to happen, but please act civil," Hestia told them, before adding, "I'll be disappointed if you both start trouble." Both grunted, with Hades leaning back in his chair. "I'll be civil as long as he is." His hands rested on the table. "I would never dream of upsetting you, Hestia." The goddess smiled. "Thank you, Hades." She then turned to look at her youngest sibling, Zeus. "Can I expect the same?" Zeus didn't say anything right away. He merely kept glaring at his elder brother, unease feeling him. Whatever reason Hestia had for bringing him here for had also gained the interest of the god of the underworld. He didn't know if he was going to like what it was, though his gaze flickered between Hades and the door Thalia walked through. What was she doing here? Why wasn't she in California with her mother? "For the sake of our sister, I will be civil. However, knowing my daughter is here, I can't help feel threatened with the feeling that our brother may try something against her," Zeus replied. Hestia sighed, and a look of defeat appeared on her face. She didn't need to look at Hades to know what expression was now on his face from the way the shadows darkened across the room. Zeus always had to get the last word in. "I think you're getting confused with yourself, Thunder Thighs. I'm not the one who goes around blasting children and their mothers out of existence." Hestia and Melino could hear the venom in Hades' voice. Melino was aware of the incident that Hades was referring to, and could see the rage building in her usually composed father. "Or have you already forgotten? Your children are dangerous. And yours are worse. I'm thankful Persephone at least doesn't take after you, unlike the rest of your brood. Go hide in your dark holes in the ground, Hades. Go back to Olympus and hide behind Hera's skirt. Both of you stop it." Hestia called for them to cease their bickering, but started dreading the worst when Zeus pushed himself to his feet. Hades wasn't far behind, both breathing heavily. Her words weren't getting through to them. Gods! How stubborn and hard-headed could they be? They were near this hostile to one another at the winter solstice, but then again, she had the other gods to rein them in. Hera would keep Zeus under control, while Persephone, though not a member of the council, would stand by her husband and do the same. Meanwhile, Poseidon would keep an eye on the two, and step between them if called for it. It rarely happened, but there was a small handful of incidents when it did. Would anything go as planned today? My children were innocent. They did nothing wrong. Hades said in a low tone, his dark eyes getting dark by the second. You punished them and their mother for no reason but your paranoia. There is a prophecy looming over us. I took the incentive. Zeus said back, and threw his hands in the air. Bah! They went straight to your realm. What does it matter? What matters is that they didn't even get a chance at life. You took it from them. The two gods started walking around the table, and towards each other. By some miracle, Zeus didn't have his master bolt on hand, nor did Hades have his helm of domination. She wasn't worried about the pair of them getting hurt. They had scuffled in the past, but this time they were in the lower world, and not Olympus. If they fought, New York might never be the same again, and many lives would be lost. Before any more words were said, or a fist could be thrown, a small breeze blew past Hestia's ear. Between Zeus and Hades, another person appeared and threw their arms out to the side, hands pushing against the elder god's chest with enough force that the window shook from the impact. To Hestia and Melino's surprise, both Zeus and Hades got sent sailing through the air. Both impacted the walls behind them and fell to the ground. Both were in a daze over what just happened. I'm only going to say this once. Where they once stood, both the god of the underworld and the sky found the blonde owner, his arms stretched out and palms glowing with gold energy. He looked annoyed, looking back and forth between the pair before they heard him say, "In the future when Hestia tells you to stop, you stop. 'Cause if you make her cry, I'll make you pay for it." He then brought one fist into his palm, and gave both a glare, you better believe it. Chapter 16, Part 16. Well, this is uncomfortable, Melino muttered beneath her breath, staring at the forms of her father and her grandfather as they steadily picked themselves up. At first, the surprise of what just happened was all over their faces. One moment they were in each other's faces, a fight potentially about to break out between the two brothers. Before they knew it, a flash of gold took over their sense of vision and felt a hand push them away with such force that neither had time to prepare for it. The pair remained with their eyes locked on Naruto, even after he threatened to beat them to a pulp if they made Hestia cry. Not many would dare say those words to either of them, let alone both. He must have had balls made of celestial bronze. Flashes of rage would dance across the features of the god of the underworld, and god of the sky. To Naruto's credit, he didn't back down, nor did he hide away. He stood there, unflinching in front of Hestia. It was almost as if he was protecting her from what might, or could happen. You would dare? Both gods asked, though glared at one another for copying the other. Yes, I would, Naruto replied, not backing down from the pair as the sky outside darkened, and the shadows in the room thickened. If you two want to fight, do it somewhere else. You don't come here and start tearing everything down. Not to mention, I won't let you upset Hestia. Not on my watch. Beside him, Hestia let out a sigh and left her chair to stand beside Naruto, who placed a hand on her shoulder. The goddess of ghosts couldn't help but notice the irked looks on Hades and Zeus's face from the action. It was certainly surprising to see Hestia allow another man to touch her in such form. "Are you two done?" Everyone noticed the steel in Hestia's voice, and Melino could already tell by the rise in temperature in the room that her divine power was leaking out more than usual. The older goddess's eyes lit up into two tiny fireballs, glancing too between her younger siblings as if they'd stolen cookies from a jar that said "Do not touch." "The pair of you can't make anything simple, can you? Today is not about fighting, nor airing out your dirty laundry with each other." Both gods straightened their jackets, with Zeus fixing his tie and Hades his collar before walking back towards them. Both brothers had their eyes focused on Naruto, who merely glanced back at them in calm. The blonde felt annoyed, though didn't try to convey it too much. He was telling the truth though when he promised to make them sorry if they made Hestia cry. He could tolerate a lot of things, but seeing his dear and cherished friend upset because her idiot brothers were having a hissy fit with each other was not one of them. If they wanted to start a fight, Naruto promised to be the one that finished it. They were lucky all he did was knock them to the other side of the room. Maybe what it took was sending them on a one-way trip to opposite ends of the city. Now, there was an idea. "You need to explain yourself, Hestia," Zeus told her. His voice was quiet, but the seriousness of his words was evident for all to hear. "Who is this man? Better yet, why is he here with my daughter? Of whom I still want to understand why she is in New York in the first place." Electricity crackled around Zeus's hands. Watching quietly, Melino gulped at the action, wishing to be anywhere else but here, or perhaps I should ask, what is he? No mortal should have the power to do what he just did. The goddess took a deep breath. "Everything will be made clear," Hestia replied, "but first you must promise me that there will be no more outbursts or fighting. I did not bring you here to start a fight." She turned to Hades, who'd remained silent throughout the exchange. "I want the same from you, Hades." A tisk sound came out from the god, of which Hestia heard. "Excuse me? Do you have something you wish to say to me, Hades?" In a rare act of defiance, Hestia marched up to Hades and looked up at him, caring little for the height difference. Hades, despite his infamy, had the decency to look worried. Hades glanced down at her, then to Naruto, then to Zeus, before resting back on Hestia. "No, I have nothing else to say. I will behave." His expression morphed back into a mask of composure, internally scolding himself for letting Zeus's words get to him. "Don't act so rash, you fool." "Thank you, brother," Hestia said to him, before turning back to their younger brother, Zeus. "For the love I have for you, sister, I will agree. But I want answers." His steely gaze said it all. His love for Hestia was pushing his pride and anger away, though for how long, anyone could guess. All it would take was a flick of a wrist, and everything nearby would become a war zone. "And you'll get them. That I can promise you." She looked back over to Naruto. "Could you finish the drinks and snacks, Naruto?" The blonde nodded. "Of course. I'll be back in a few minutes." He gave one last look to the pair of gods watching him, before slipping back to the kitchen, mumbling something beneath his breath. "Just so you both know, if you try anything like this again, I'm willing to take extreme measures to bring you both to heel." She showed off a bracelet sitting comfortably on her wrist, with a jewel sitting in the middle. To the horror of both Zeus and Hades, they watched the jewel glow purple. "I will call her if necessary." In an instant, both Zeus and Hades appeared to settle down at the threat, though threw one last glare their way. Afterwards, the two returned to their seats in silence, trying to look anywhere but at each other. Feeling the situation had been diffused, for the time being, Hestia sighed and returned to her seat. "Okay, Hestia. Next time, start with that threat." If she followed through with it, she was sure neither god would dare pipe up. Being the eldest of 6 siblings could be such a pain sometimes. Maybe she needed a vacation? Some isolated beach somewhere would be nice. And some of those drinks with the little umbrellas. They sat in silence for the better part of 5 minutes, which felt like the longest and most awkward 5 minutes of Melino's life. "I wonder if Cerberus would jump out of a hole in the ground, swallow me, and then take me back down with him. Anything's better than the tension around this table." How did Hestia stand it? Then again, Hestia had to place peacekeeper every time members of their family came into conflict. Looking at her from the corner of her eye, the goddess remained composed. A smile rested on her face, though she noted how her eyes were still resembling two fireballs. Zeus and Hades. Zeus and Hera. Artemis and Aphrodite. Ares and Hephaestus. Hades and Demeter. They were the most dysfunctional family in the world, and that named a few of the quarrels. People wondered why she kept to herself in the underworld. Anything was better than being stuck in this mess. I'm starting to think I should have left all this alone. What felt like the longest 5 minutes in the world, all four deities heard the door swing open and watched as the blonde owner appeared with a tray in hand. Naruto could sense the tension in the room, but pushed it aside and wore his usual smile, appearing next to Hestia. Sorry to keep you waiting, Tia. 1 peppermint tea. Thank you, Naruto. Next came Melino. If I remember rightly, it was a coffee with 2 sugars and cream. He lowered the drink down on the table, with Melino quickly cupping it between her hands. She gave him a small nod. That's right. Thank you, she said quietly. She watched him move to her father next, and inwardly applauded him for appearing so calm. And for Mr. Underhill, Naruto said, staring at Hades and hearing the annoyance laced in his hum as he used his alias name. Hestia appeared amused, though Zeus let out a snort, which drew the ire of Hades, who sent him a quick glare. 1 amaretto coffee. Thank you. 2 words were all Hades said, before falling back into silence. Finally, for Mr. King himself, Zeus, 2 pairs of blue eyes looked at one another. Hestia informed me before today was you liked to drink, so I hope this is to your taste. He lowered the final mug onto the table, and a strong scent of spiced pumpkin went across his sense of smell. The king of Olympus couldn't deny it smelled good. Despite his inner pride feeling wounded from the man's earlier shot on him, he pushed it down as deep as he could as he remembered his promise to Hestia. Like Hades, he gave a quick thanks before taking the mug into one hand and bringing it up to his lips. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he couldn't deny the second the drink touched his lips, his eyes marginally widened. It was good. Very good. Some cafes tended to make the pumpkin spice too weak, or too strong. Here, it was a perfect balance. He didn't feel the need to scrunch up his face. I'll give that to him. He knows how to make a good drink. It's a good thing I made a lot of these now that there's more of us than thought, Naruto told everyone and lowered a large plate of baked delicacies into the middle of the table. Everyone, including Zeus and Hades, leaned over to get a good look. Zeus, in particular, zeroed in on the lemon slices that sat to one side. Next to them, were slices of angel cake and rolls of Battenbug. Each one looked as good as the last. It's almost like someone told him how much I enjoy lemon slices. He thought and looked at his smiling sister from the corner of his eye. Hestia always did know how to butter him up, and keep him happy. Some movement came from the side and noticed Naruto pulling over a chair and took the spot next to Hestia. A frown wove its way onto his face, as well as Hades. Neither appeared to like the idea of another male sitting so close to their elder sister. So, you guys have questions, Naruto replied calmly, looking at everyone sitting around the table. I'll fill in as many blanks as I can. It took no longer than a second before Hades managed to beat his brother and daughter to the punch. How are you alive? Your kind were wiped out years ago during the Great Shift. No one could have survived. To the point and blunt. Hades wasn't leaving any room for backtracking. Though irritated he didn't get the first question, Zeus remained silent, wishing for an answer too, while stuffing his face with a lemon cake. That's good. Yeah, I figured that might be your first question, Naruto replied, scratching the back of his head, and chuckling. Honestly, I'm not sure myself how I survived it, though I suspect Gaia likely played a part in that too. The hairs on the arms of the deities stood on end at hearing the Earth Mother's names. Even Hestia, who knew the story, never got over the feeling. Gaia. Zeus stopped himself from grabbing another lemon slice. What does our grandmother have to do with you? The blonde shinobi stared back at Zeus, a seriousness in his eyes that stood firmer than the ones he showed earlier. She has everything to do with me. He reached over to the table next to them and grabbed a knife from the top. Everyone watched as he slowly dragged the edge across his palm, showing no pain at the metal tore the skin apart. Afterwards, he placed it back on the table and held his palm up for everyone to see. What they saw wasn't blood, but instead, the golden ichor of the gods. Immortality. Naruto Uzumaki was immortal. You're immortal, Zeus stated as a fact, rather than a question. Are you telling us Gaia made you immortal? I am. Zeus's nostrils flared. Immortality was a precious privilege. It was a power all Olympians had but rarely used. To make someone who was immortal, the god had to willingly part with a small piece of their divine power, hence why it was a rarity on Olympus. Indeed, the last person made immortal by the gods was millennia ago. It simply wasn't something that happened anymore. Zeus was king, and Gaia had no right to create another. Her actions had enough consequences on Olympus. They didn't need to add one more to the mix. Why? Why would she give you that gift? To his, Hades, and Milan's surprise, the blonde scoffed and leaned back in his chair. It's not a gift, it's a curse. I didn't choose for eternal life. She gave it to me forcefully. His voice was bitter. She doesn't care for what others want. Only her own ideals and desires. You still haven't told us what you are, Zeus asked, digging further into the mystery that was presenting itself. He got an answer, though it wasn't from Naruto. He's a golden man, Lord Grandfather, Melino said quietly, drawing the attention of everyone else. Zeus's eyebrows shot straight up, looking back and forth between his granddaughter and Naruto, a shinobi of the old era that predates the Olympians in Olympus. The ones that were given life by Mother Earth. She didn't want to say the primordial's name. Names had power, and she didn't want to draw any attention to herself. An array of emotions wept over Zeus's face, though his eyes went wide as he looked at Naruto. Of course, he was aware of the golden generation, but to think that one was still alive after so many millennia was unthinkable. He tried to put words together, but nothing was coming out of his mouth. His mind was rampant with thoughts, some negative, and fewer positive. You shouldn't exist, Zeus told Naruto point blank. The time of the Golden Men died before the end of the Titan War, and you should have gone down with it. And I agree with that statement, and yet Gaia chose to lump me with immortality whether I wanted it or not, Naruto replied. He felt a hand fall onto his wrist and gave Hestia a smile at her attempt to comfort him. You said Gaia gave you immortality by force, and it's something you didn't want, Melino asked, seemingly growing in confidence as the talk around the table became less about Zeus and Hades fighting, and more about the mysterious blonde. Can you tell us how your circumstances came to be? The blonde shinobi turned to look at Hestia, who merely smiled at him back and rubbed her thumb against his skin. It was her way of telling him she was here for him, and he was grateful she was. He sighed. To understand my circumstances, you have to go back years before the great shift happened. He told them, pushing his memory as far back as he could, back to when the Titans ruled. Unlike the people of today, my people wielded a power called chakra. A combination of physical energy and spiritual, that when blended, could allow us to perform feats that few could imagine. To prove his point, he put his two hands together, and everyone watched as bluish energy encompassed his body in a flicker of light. Instead of being warriors, we were known as shinobi or ninja. Different than the ones today in the East, though not without similarities. Throughout a large portion of our time walking the earth, the clans of different families warred against each other for land, power, wealth. The usual cliché thing, until eventually, they came together and started forming villages. When this happened, the Titans took notice. Zeus and Hades, and even Hestia straightened in their seats. How so? Understand, I wasn't born yet, so everything I know was handed down to me later in life. Naruto explained, but through history, the Titans kept an eye on us. When my village, Konohagakure, or the village hidden in the leaves came to fruition, Cronus sent his two strongest warriors to investigate, and put a stop to it. Hyperion and Atlas, Zeus growled out the names of the two Titans. The two Titans had been a thorn in the Olympians' side throughout the war between the two factions. Atlas, the Titan of endurance and strength, developed a rivalry of sorts with him. He always sought out the youngest son of Cronus when entering the battlefield, and the pair had some mighty battles throughout it. Hyperion was equally as formidable, and the closest in sadistic tendencies to the Olympians' father. Yeah, those two. Naruto scratched the back of his head, moving his neck from side to side feeling some kinks building up. What I do know, is they were defeated and sent running by the founders of the Leaf Village, who stopped their advancement. Hashirama Senju and Madara Uchiha. The names meant little to Zeus and Hades. However, they took note that 2 men of the Golden Age were able to defeat a pair of all-powerful titans like Hyperion and Atlas. On a good day, they would hard-press the likes of themselves and their brother and sisters. They could likely take down some of the younger Olympians, and the rest of the minor gods a part of their pantheon. Atlas was second only to Cronus, with Hyperion not far behind. How can mortals have power equivalent to the likes of titans? The very idea of it is unthinkable. Zeus said aloud. It didn't seem possible in his mind. Mortals could grow, but surely they couldn't get to that height of power. Madara Uchiha and Hashirama Senju were recognized as 2 of the strongest to exist. Their lineage makes their chakra and bodies stronger. That whole business is another story in itself, so I'll leave that for another time. Naruto told them, before continuing. The stuff with Kaguya and the sage could wait for another day. Either way, afterwards Hashirama recognized the threat these entities could possess, and thus made sure that every Hokage that came after him knew of their existence. He didn't want the rest of the world to know, to avoid a panic. Hestia nodded in agreement. Smart. I don't think any mortal would want to know that a group of all-powerful immortals are out there, and could try and destroy their homes in a moment's notice. It was why the pantheons of the world, including Olympus, didn't come out to humanity. The minds of most mortals wouldn't be able to handle such information, and panic would spread through the world. It would cause more harm than good. Then what? Melino asked, urging him to continue. Hades remained silent, listening intently to Naruto's words. Life continued after the encounter. Villages across the elemental nations, the name we gave the supercontinent, came to be. Konoha was built in the land of fire and became known as the strongest of the 5 major villages. The leader of the Leaf was known as the Hokage. In this case, that was Hashirama Senju. For decades, we were in and out of a war with each village vying for supremacy over the other. By the time of the 4th Shinobi War, the 5 major hidden villages finally put aside their differences to fight a common enemy. Afterwards, we all decided it was time to let old grudges lie. He smiled, thinking back days the 5 Kages got together to keep the peace. Many years after the war ended, it was my time to lead the Leaf Village. Hades leaned forward, finally speaking after remaining silent since the start. You were one of these, Hokage. Naruto grinned, and patted his chest. I sure was. I was known as the 7th Hokage. My teacher, Kakashi-sensei, was the 6th Hokage, and my dad was the 4th. He laughed and rubbed the back of his head. I guess you could say I was bound to get it eventually. That's all well and good, everyone heard, and turned to look at Zeus, who had his arms crossed over his chest, but you have yet to explain where the Earth Mother comes into all this. I know, I'm getting there, the blonde reasoned, putting his hands up. Patience is a virtue, brother. There is no need to rush. Hestia added, giving her brother a knowing look, I think he's getting to the main part of the story. She already knew the story, having learned it all from him millennia ago, but had been some time since she heard it from the shinobi's mouth. Grabbing a lemon slice, and breaking off a piece to put in her mouth, she motioned for Naruto to continue. Her brother could only grunt but remain silent as Naruto continued. It was during my 5th year as Hokage when it happened. I remember meeting her to this day. The image of a dark-haired woman appeared in his mind. I was training when I first saw her. I was there for about an hour when the next thing I know, I hear a woman crying. There shouldn't have been anyone else on the training field, and I would have sensed someone approaching. She just appeared. I walk a little ways off into the trees a small ways away from the field, and there I find a woman in dark robes sitting under a large tree. She's crouched down with her knees tucked against her chest, with her hands covering her face. I've never seen her before in my life. Reaching over the table, Naruto picked up a slice of angel cake, breaking a piece off and threw it in his mouth. So, I go over talk to her, and we start talking. It takes a few minutes cause she's in such a state, but eventually she opens up and tells me she's having problems with her family. They're fighting with each other, and she doesn't know what to do. He looked over at Zeus, and then to Hades. I should point out, I have no idea who she is, or what she is. She hid her energy to appear like a mortal. Immortals such as ourselves are known to do that when we traverse through the mortal world. Hades said, with the other deities each nodding in agreement, though we typically keep a sliver of our power active in the chance something happens. Mortals around us would begin to be affected by the aura our power gives off. Though Gaia is different in that retrospect. Zeus added, she is a primordial entity. Her power is next to impossible to read. It's like a sea with no bottom. Her literal body is the very ground we walk on. She's always connected to it. If she chooses to walk the amongst mortals, she can switch the connection off like a light switch in a mortal home, and vice versa. She can hide even from us. Then what happened? Melino asked. Pieces of the puzzle were finally falling into place. I gave her an ear, and we talked. We spoke for hours underneath that tree. I help her how best I can, and we begin to trading information and stories. I assumed she was from the Leaf Village. A civilian. I can't sense any hint of negative feelings coming from her. He looked back at everyone, that's something I can do. I can sense the negative feelings coming off someone. Useful. Very useful. Afterwards, we went our separate ways, and I didn't think much of it. As far as I saw it, I helped someone out. He explained, picturing the memory in his mind. A week later, she reappears. This time, waiting for me at the edge of the training field. This continues for 2 months. 2 months. Yeah. The blonde nodded. Every time, we talk about all kinds of things. Our families, our goals in life. Konoha. We don't leave any stone unturned. In a way, I think we became friends. At least, that's what I believed. His fist clenched against the table, throwing another piece of angel cake in his mouth. I tell my wife, Hinata, about her, and she thinks she must feel lonely with all the chaos going on. I tell her all about our conversations when I come home. She tells me I should invite her over for dinner one evening. Let her be around a loving family. The novelty of his words wasn't lost on anyone. The next time I saw her, that when everything changed. Everyone around the table straightened their backs, paying attention very closely. It started like any other day. The sun was out without a cloud in the sky. There was a gentle breeze grazing against your skin. You couldn't have asked for a better day. He remembered that day like the back of his hand. It didn't matter how quickly the years passed. That day would forever remain fresh in his memory. I made my way to my usual training field, knowing I likely wouldn't get anything done. As expected, there she was. The same dark robe with her dark hair running down her back. This time, though, something was different with her eyes. She looked determined. Almost stone-faced. I asked her if everything was okay, and that's when it happened. She spilled the beans on who she was. On everything. He took a long drawn-out breath. I'd never been in the presence of a goddess before. At least, not a real one anyway. His foot tapped beneath the table against the floor. Gaia, she told me her name was, and that she was the mother to all. The creator of humanity. The mother to the Titans. The first true god. She explained the family drama was her children were in a war with their children, her grandchildren, and that they were trying to take over and lay claim to the world. The Titanomachy. The children of the Titan King looked at one another with Hades speaking up. This means Gaia was truly awake during it all. I always thought she was in a state of slumber during our war with the Titans. When the shift happened, I believed it was her creating a new landscape for a new era. A clean slate. Hestia nodded. That's what we all believed. Sadly, that was not the case. Naruto shook his head. It wasn't. What did she want from you? Zeus asked, his blue eyes staring intently into Naruto. Why would the Earth Mother go to all that trouble? The god of the sky has remained quiet for the most part as he listened to the story. Questions formed in his mind. She wanted me to enter the war under the banner of children, and fight off the invaders that sought to take their home from them. 3 sets of eyes widened at the declaration, while Hestia merely nodded sadly to his side. She wanted me to come to fight for the Titans and help destroy the Olympian gods. The hairs on the blonde's arms stood on end, a feeling of static in the air as he looked over at Zeus. The king of Olympus didn't appear to like that piece of information. And you said no, right? Melino questioned. A piece of lemon cake dangled from the side of her mouth. The blonde gave a half smile. Well, I'll put it this way. You guys won, didn't you? And the Titans are the ones locked away. This time, Hades asked the question, then why did you say no? Why would I bring my people, who have fought 4 wars up to that point, into a war they have no place in? Naruto reasoned. The 4th Shinobi War had been terrible, but it was the event that ultimately led to the 5 great villages uniting as one and putting aside their differences. Dragging the Shinobi world into another war, this time against literal gods and monsters, would have spelt the death of thousands, if not more. The cycle of peace they'd create would be in tatters, and it would fall to him as the one who destroyed it, so I told her no, and inadvertently sealed the fate of my people. There was a heavy air around the table, and the blonde felt Hestia's knee beneath the table gently nudge against his own. She knew they were getting to the climax of the story, and wanted her friend to know she was still there with him. The gesture wasn't lost on Naruto and smiled his thanks. That's when Gaia showed me who she really was. It was like she'd worn a mask, and my answer caused her to throw that mask away and show her true colors and intent. Turns out, he looked at Hades and Zeus. Mother Earth doesn't enjoy being told no. Zeus snorted, I could have told you that. Where do you think old Thunder Breath over there gets it from? Hades added, earning a growl and a glare from his younger sibling. Boys, you've been doing so well. Hestia sighed, massaging her forehead, please don't ruin it. Hades let out a low hum, but apologized, sorry, Hestia. He looked back at Zeus and found the god of the sky gently itching the side of his eye, his middle finger clearly on display. The elder narrowed his eyes back but didn't react. After that, it felt like a cold chill ran up my spine, and the ground beneath me began to shift. Naruto could picture himself on that training field, the Earth Mother standing just feet from him. I remember this look on her face. It was this mixture of anger, sadness, and resolve. She started shouting at me how ungrateful we were, and that my rejection of her plea cemented that it was a mistake to create us all those years ago. If we wouldn't help the one that made us, then we would be shown how easy it would be to wipe the world clean. The Great Shift. The 4 deities all said. The Great Shift. He confirmed. It was like the whole world was getting turned upside down. As if we were in a snow globe being shaken around from side to side. I told her to stop what she was doing, and put my hands on her shoulders, only to watch as her body crumbled into dirt and leaves. The screaming came next. Buildings across Konoha started to give way as the tremors got stronger. The blonde's expression turned pained. I could feel my wife and my children in our home. I could feel their fear. No one around the table said anything, letting Naruto come to the end of his story. The next thing I knew, I felt weightless. The ground beneath me swallowed me up, and all I remember is falling to infinite darkness. I used every drop of power I had to push myself back to the surface, but every time I thought I saw a needle of light above me, I felt myself being crushed beneath the endless weight of her body, pushing me back down further. I'm not sure how long I was crawling through dirt, but it felt like days. Maybe weeks. He could still feel the walls of dirt and soil pushing against him on all sides. I begged to die, and I guess Gaia heard me and had different plans for me. Instead, I felt a surge of power like nothing I'd ever felt cocoon around me. Before I knew what was happening, my body got pushed out of the earth, as if reborn from the dirt. Naruto released a sigh. I saw the devastation with my own 2 eyes. In the no time at all my people were gone. My wife. My friends. The people I swore to protect. All gone without a trace. I am the last of my kind, and I've wandered the world for millennia. Seen all the ages and come out the other side all the same. He put his hands together. That's my story. Along the way, I met Hestia. He gently nudged his friend with his elbow, making the dark-haired goddess smile. That's a lot of information to take in. Both Zeus and Hades massaged their foreheads. Melino, to her credit, took it in her stride, munching away on the final lemon slice. She'd managed to grab it before the god of the sky could lay claim to it. She was going to need a refill of her drink too. Luckily for her, she wasn't the only one, and Naruto was quick to notice, looks like you guys are out of drinks. Do you all want a refill while you digest everything I told you? I need to check on Thalia too. Hades and Hestia both nodded their thanks, though Zeus frowned as he watched his cup taken away. We still need to discuss my daughter after this. Of course. The moment Naruto disappeared, the four gods began to discuss, quickly being led by Zeus. I don't like it. Hades snorted, there's a shocker. The god of the underworld would be more surprised if Zeus winked at the blonde and gave him a thumbs up. However, he couldn't deny he was a little unsettled at everything they just learned, though, I can't say I'm happy about it too. If he's been alive for as long as he's telling us, why didn't he reveal himself to sooner? That's what I'm saying. For once, the pair were in agreement with each other. Naruto's presence was unsettling at best. He was strong. Not just anyone could separate them the way he did by forcing them away from one another. Many of the other Olympians would dare get between them, other than Poseidon, or possibly Hera. Zeus's electric blue eyes stared over at his sister. You two appear friendly with each other. You've known one another for a long time. Hestia nodded, a very long time. We met 10 years after the Titanomachy ended, and we've been friends ever since. Outside of our family, my strongest relationship is with Naruto. And the two of you are just friends. Hestia's eyes narrowed, what are you insinuating? Her eyes lit up like fireballs once more. She didn't like what Zeus was trying to imply. Gulping at Hestia's obvious annoyance from the question, Zeus steeled his nerves, it's as I said. Your friendship has never evolved past that of friends. The fire in Hestia's eyes grew brighter, don't get angry. It's a fair question. My relationship with Naruto is that of friendship. Do I love him? Yes, I do, but it's strictly platonic, and vice versa. Naruto knows of my vow to never take a husband. To never sire children, and has always been respectful of that decision. She gave her brothers a pointed look, I don't need the two of you telling me who I can and can't spend my time with. Both nodded. Are we clear? Crystal, sister. You vouch for him then? You can vouch that he does not intend to harm Olympus. She rolled her eyes, before voicing to Zeus, if he wanted to harm Olympus, he would have done it millennia ago. The idea that the blonde would wage war with the Olympians was laughable. He didn't care about such things, and he didn't hold the pride, or pettiness to do so. He disliked war in all forms, he stayed under the radar because he wanted to. Not all of us like being the center of attention. The king of Olympus grunted but conceded her to her point. Besides, look how many of our family have visited this place, and spoken so highly of him. Apollo, Hermes, Aphrodite, Persephone, she gestured to Hades, our brother, Hebe, Triton, and we can't forget Athena and Artemis. It all started with her two nieces, even Hera mentioned she wanted to visit at some point. Melano, once again remaining silent, felt the need to add, his family in Elysium also speak of him in the highest regard. Maybe a little biased, but it's worth noting. You saw my family. Melano nearly jumped out of her seat at Naruto's voice. Turning around, she looked up at the blonde only to find the most vulnerable expression she'd seen on the man. Hope and the need to know more shone in his eyes. She nodded her head. I did. Who? Who did you see? Melano recounted who she met, your wife, Hinata, and your two children. The blonde looked ready to crumble then and there, threatening to drop the tray balanced in his hands. Your parents were there too. Your sensei and godfather, along with the giant-chested Hokage woman with blonde hair. A heartfelt chuckle escaped his mouth, Grandma Tsunade. Big-chested woman. Zeus and Hades asked simultaneously. The goddess of ghosts nodded, and made a motion across her chest, bigger than Lady Demeter. Both gods looked surprised, given their sister was known to have the largest bust on Olympus, and enjoyed reminding people of that fact. Giant bazookas, I'm telling you. Zeus and Hades looked intrigued and turned to Naruto for confirmation, who merely shrugged back, yeah, I don't think I've ever seen someone bigger in this day and age. Naturally, anyway. The bust of the fifth Hokage was typically a topic forced on him by Jiraiya, who familiarized himself with every part of Tsunade's body, despite never having been with said woman. You don't say, Zeus replied, suddenly having the urge to make a trip down to the underworld. Even Hades, who loved Persephone more than anything, couldn't help but wonder if Melino's words were true. A cough brought them out of their thoughts, finding Hestia giving both of them an irritated expression, and tapping one of her index fingers on the table. I'm sure Hera and Persephone would be pleased to know the two of you have taken a vested interest in another woman's breasts. The pair had the good decency to shake their heads. That won't be necessary, sister. Hades said back. What Hera doesn't know won't hurt her. She didn't appear convinced but would let the matter slide for now. Turning back to Naruto, Hestia asked, Thalia still napping? The blonde nodded, yeah, she's out like a light. Cute little snores and all. The shinobi turned to face Zeus. I guess you'd like to know how Thalia ended up with us now, huh? Yes, I would. The king insisted. Why is she in New York? And where is her mother? California, I'd imagine, Hestia replied, before the pair took it, in turn, to explain the story to Zeus, and how Thalia ended up with Naruto. To Zeus's credit, he didn't interrupt. He sat and listened to their tale, taking in the information with his daughter's face pictured in his mind. She appeared nervous around him when he entered the fox's den, but then again, she was only 4. Children at that age were typically shy around new people, and Thalia was no exception. The last time he'd seen Thalia was little more than a year ago. Despite what the other gods said about him, he did care for his children and their mortal mothers and tried to watch out for them whenever necessary and possible. Namely to ensure Hera didn't try anything once she learned of their existence. Though justified in her anger, she could be capriciously cruel to his demigod children and their mortal parent. If she wanted to aim her hate at someone, he'd prefer she took it out on him. His child was innocent when it came to the mechanics of their creation. As he listened, he was unaware of his right hand holding his mug with a clenched fist. His knuckles steadily turned bone white as his annoyance grew. Damn it, Beryl. What were you thinking? When she walked out, I contacted Hestia, and we came up with the plan to inform you of what happened the day after your renewed vow to your wife, Naruto told him, with his hands were clasped together on the table. Hestia told me it was the best option given the good mood you'd be in. Zeus groaned and gave his sister a look. Hestia merely smiled back. Though things didn't go to plan. Everyone looked at Hades and Melino. Oh, sorry for spoiling your top-secret meeting. Hades feigned an apologetic tone, his expression betraying his words. Either way, that's everything. How I met Thalia and why she has been with me. The blonde smiled. She's been a joy to be around. She made my home life a lot more colorful, that's for sure. And I've been checking on her regularly. I stop by a few times a week. I've developed a bit of a relationship with my dear niece. Hestia added. Stop by? You practically live at my home now. You have a room and everything. Naruto replied, and watched Hestia shrug her shoulders. The pair of brothers narrowed their eyes, though didn't say anything. So, Melino started looking across the table. Where do we go from here? What do we do? Her elders all looked at one another. They weren't sure either. Even Zeus was at a bit of a loss. This whole situation is rather troublesome, Hades admitted, scratching the back of his head, and not noticing Naruto look away to contain a chuckle. The god of the underworld was sporting some Nara-like tendencies. We discovered far more than I imagined we would. He looked back over to Hestia, who met his gaze with her own. You trust this man with your life? Hestia didn't hesitate when she answered, I do. Hades hummed to himself, half nodding at the answer and closing his eyes. Everyone just watched him for a moment, wondering what was going through the head of God. The information churned around in his head. After a minute, he sighed and nodded again. I guess that's enough for me to know. It is. Hestia, Melino, and Zeus all said, while Naruto looked somewhat surprised. He wasn't sure what to expect from the god of the underworld, but he wasn't thinking Hades would make that decision so quickly. If Hestia trusts him, then I guess that'll be enough. For now, at least. He looked at Naruto. Could you get us some more of those lemon slices? Blinking a couple of times from surprise, the blonde jumped up. Sure. Naruto quickly whisked away into the kitchen to get more of the baked goods. You would trust him like that? The god of the sky had a skeptical look on his face, and couldn't hide his incredulous tone. He had figured his brother would put up more of a fight. How could he be so trusting of a person with all the information they'd just learned? Hades leaned back in his chair. It's as I said. Our dear sister is a good judge of character. If she can put her faith in him and trust him, then I shall at least put my trust in her words. The god of the underworld smirked. Besides, I won't be leaving him idle to his devices. I will have someone keep an eye on him for a while, to ensure our sister's safety and his intentions are pure. I don't need a babysitter, brother. Hestia replied, though leaned forward. However, what do you mean? Coming out of the kitchen, Naruto appeared with another tray of lemon slices and angel cake, and placed it in the middle of the table. It's a good thing I made extras. What I mean is, Hades' hand rose in the air, and came down to rest on an unsuspecting Melano's head. I will have Melano remain in the human world to keep an eye on him. Huh. Huh. The head of said goddess swiveled around to stare at her father, eyes wide. I am? What? No. The others, including Naruto, appeared surprised. You can't go around offering my services like that. Yes, I can. I'm your father, and lord. So what? Offer your own damn services. Not me. I think it's a lovely idea. It will be nice to see more of you, Melano. Hestia added, appearing pleased with the idea. She rarely got to see her niece. Seeing her today was a treat. For the sake of keeping the peace, I don't mind, Naruto told them, putting his hands behind his head and looking up at the ceiling. I've been thinking it could be time to hire a waitress, or two. I could focus on the things in the kitchen that way. I wouldn't have to explain why there are multiple versions of myself running around back there. The three immortals blinked in surprise, while Hestia merely smiled at his words and drank her tea. There are more of you back there. 4 more. It's a technique I use a lot. The shadow clone jutsu. Sounds handy, Hades admitted, not appearing too bothered. Sounds like when we split our essence. Can we rewind, please? Do I not get a say in this? Melano shook in her chair with her hands running through her hair. She wasn't pleased in the slightest. Eventually, after another minute of hearing her name getting thrown around, the goddess of ghosts sunk in her hair and rested her forehead against the table. I've made a huge mistake. Smirking at his daughter as she accepted her fate, the rest of the trio looked over at Zeus, who'd remained quiet during the whole ordeal. The god of the sky was merely toying with his coffee mug and tapping the side with his fingers. Any thoughts, Zeus? It was Hestia who asked. It was rare for him to be so silent. The king of Olympus had plenty of thoughts, but he didn't know where to start. A powerful immortal that predated Olympus was sat in front of him and ran a cafe under his nose. Remaining hidden for millennia until now, Zeus couldn't help but feel trepidatious. Just because Hestia knew him and vouched for him, that didn't rule out the possibility that the blonde could be a grave threat to Olympus. Anyone who had a connection to Gaia was a cause for concern. After all, look at what happened with the Titans and Typhon, and then the giants many years later. He didn't want to invite more problems to Olympus's doorstep. However, all of the gods that visited the fox's den had expressed their delight, namely towards the owner. Impressing the likes of Artemis and Athena was impressive, as the pair were good at discerning when a threat was nearby. Not to mention, his relationship with Hestia. He just wasn't sure. He wanted to blast the blonde into oblivion and be done with it all, but that wouldn't fly this time. Thalia, Zeus mumbled out, she's been well under your care. She has, the blonde nodded. The first couple of days were an adjustment, but having Hestia around helped. You've developed a soft spot for her. Zeus looked to his sister, who nodded in his question. I have. I kept an eye on her as you asked when I could spare it. Sadly, I wasn't watching when Beryl decided to leave her, but I've been there since. This time, Zeus nodded, and for a moment, fell silent. Despite what his brethren thought of him, he did care for his half-blood children. Although their lives were fleeting compared to the lives of his godly children, he did want their lives to be somewhat happy, however possible that was. That's why the children of the gods went to stay at Camp Half-Blood. In truth, I am unsure what to do. On one hand, your very existence could spell trouble for Olympus. An unchained anomaly with power that rivals the gods. Zeus was upfront, though Naruto did not appear to take offense to his words. It was understandable given his position as leader of his family. On the other hand, my daughter is in your care, and appears healthy. Zeus rubbed his brow with his hand, briefly looking Hestia's way and felt her dark brown eyes lingering on him. As Hades stated, Hestia, vouching for you works in your favor. If it were not that, I would blast you into oblivion. Somehow, I don't think that'll work, Hestia thought but didn't voice it. If, Zeus started to say, and looked at everyone around the table, if I allow this to slide, and continue to allow my daughter to remain under your care with Hestia providing a watchful eye, you can guarantee her safety. Naruto didn't hesitate for a moment, before responding with, I can. A few monsters have already tried, but I sent them packing. Zeus grunted, good. She will need to learn how to defend herself. If she's like my other demigods, some of her powers will start showing up sooner. I noticed since whenever she sneezes the electrical appliances at home go off. Zeus sighed, I'm guessing that's a common one. Very common. The king of Olympus sank back in his chair. If things are to remain as they are, it will mean the other gods of my pantheon will be unable to visit here in the future. Hestia watching over Thalia, while Melino keeps an eye on you will draw enough attention. Having gods constantly flocking here is unwise, and will later spell trouble in the long run. The rules I created millennia ago are for a reason. Naruto and Hestia looked at each other and nodded. Yeah, Hestia warned me that might be the case. Know this, Zeus looked Naruto square in the eye, I might not be around, but that doesn't mean I won't be keeping a close eye on you as well. Your existence is unnerving, given how long you've gone unchecked. Your ties to Gaia make that even more prevalent. The first sign of trouble, I'm taking Thalia and sending her to Camp Halblood. Zeus let out a low huff, earning a roll of the eyes from Hades. I might even have Chiron stop by your home and visit from time to time. Naruto wasn't looking to argue with the king of Olympus, and shrugged, if that's what you want, then fine. Just know, I'll protect Thalia from whoever I deem a threat to her life and happiness. This time, the blonde stared right back at Zeus, and I do mean, everyone. Noted. A sigh of relief escaped Hestia, happy that overall the meeting succeeded. She tried to ignore the groan and complaints coming from Melino, who was still unhappy with being forced into playing the role of Naruto's babysitter for X amount of time. Well, it started rocky, but at least everything ended on a good note, she thought and looked back at the bracelet sitting on her wrist. I'm glad I didn't have to resort to the big guns. I fear Mother would have taken the opportunity to make Naruto sweat and critique his food. The Titanus never failed in making the blonde feel on edge. Her thoughts and everyone's conversations were quickly halted as an iris message started to form next to Zeus. Hestia motioned to Naruto, who was quick to disappear in the back, leaving the deities to deal with whoever was calling. Zeus. Zeus. What the hell is going on? Why were there thunderclouds encircling Manhattan, and why was the ground shaking? Oh, boy, everyone thought, as the concerned, yet annoyed visage of Hera appeared through the portal. Everything's fine, my love. Zeus reasoned, putting his hands in the air to show everything was fine. The goddess of marriage didn't appear convinced. She gave her husband a look while crossing her arms, causing the god of the sky to point across the table towards his elder brother. Said brother rolled his eyes, mouthing the word, coward, as the portal spun around and faced the god of the underworld. Instantly, Hera's face soured. Oh. You're here. Nice to see you too. Thrown any puppies off Olympus recently? Hades asked, staring at his younger sister with an emotionless gaze. Whether his words had any impact on Hera was debatable, as the woman had mastered the skill of keeping a neutral face. Though, she did turn her nose up at him and swish her hair to one side as the portal turned back to Zeus. Never mind. I think I can see what angered you, just don't take it out on the city. I wouldn't want to see Manhattan razed to the ground. She looked to Hestia, please, keep them both in check, sister. I always do, Hestia replied. I'll return to my previous engagement. Do try and have a good time, husband. I'll try. Oh, Hera, before you go. I have a message for you. Once again, Hera turned to her elder brother, what? Everyone watched as Hades reached into his pocket, fumbling around for a brief moment, before pulling out his hand. His fist was clenched, though his middle finger was riding high for everyone to see. "You look fat in that dress." Before Hera could say anything, Hades snapped his fingers and forced the portal to disappear. The last image he saw was his sister's expression turning murderous before vanishing. Looking smug with himself, he looked to Hestia, who merely shook her head. "Very mature." "I hate you so much," Zeus muttered, glaring at Hades. No doubt Hera would be in a foul mood when he returned to Olympus, and he was the one who would have to deal with it. The god of the underworld merely smirked to himself, while mentally patting himself on the shoulder. Today turned out more fulfilling than he imagined. That's it for part 8. Thank you for watching and see you on the next video.